Welcome to True Drama Stories, your home for captivating tales of real-life inspired drama. Sit back, relax, and let's dive into today's story.
My toxic ex used lies to turn my family against me after the breakup. Throwaway account for obvious reasons. It's been nearly 2 years since I walked out of the life I thought I had built with Sarah, and yet, the scars feel as fresh as the night everything fell apart. They say leaving a toxic relationship is hard, but no one tells you how much harder it is when your own family chooses the abuser's side. I met Sarah at a friend's party. She was magnetic, the kind of woman who could effortlessly command attention, drawing people in with her charm and confidence. She had this aura of spontaneity and wit that felt intoxicating, especially to someone like me, who often found himself overthinking his every move. Her presence was electric, disarming, and exactly the kind of energy I thought I needed. She laughed at my awkward jokes, called me refreshingly honest, and made me feel like the most interesting person in the room. By the end of the night, I was completely taken. In the early days of our relationship, things were nothing short of magical. We explored new places, stayed up late sharing dreams and vulnerabilities, and built a connection that felt both exhilarating and consuming. Sarah had a way of making me feel like I was her entire world. She showered me with affection, attention, and words that made me believe we were perfectly aligned. I mistook her intensity for passion and her possessiveness for care. Looking back now, I can see the red flags were there all along. In the early days of our relationship, things were nothing short of magical. We explored new places, stayed up late sharing dreams and vulnerabilities, and built a connection that felt both exhilarating and consuming. Sarah had a way of making me feel like I was her entire world. She showered me with affection, attention, and words that made me believe we were perfectly aligned. I mistook her intensity for passion and her possessiveness for care. Looking back now, I can see the red flags were there all along, even in those first few months. Sarah's attentiveness often blurred the lines between affection and surveillance. She would text me constantly, often with innocent questions about my day or plans, but there was an undertone of needing to know everything. At first, I dismissed it as interest or excitement. Then came the moments where she'd casually ask for my phone to look something up or check the time, only for her hands to linger just long enough to scroll through my messages. It felt invasive, but I convinced myself that this was normal, even flattering. I didn't see it for what it truly was, an early sign of control. The shift was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. Her once playful remarks about my friends evolved into thinly veiled critiques. She would question why I continued spending time with people she deemed unworthy or untrustworthy. Slowly but surely, I began to see less of my closest friends, not because I wanted to but because I felt the pressure to prioritize her comfort. My own social circle began to shrink, not through explicit demands but through Sarah's quiet manipulation. The critiques soon extended to my family. She planted seeds of doubt about my relationships with them, often questioning why I let them have so much influence over my decisions. She portrayed herself as someone who only wanted the best for me, yet her words left me questioning the dynamics I'd cherished for years. Over time, I started to feel like I was caught between two worlds, one where my family and friends existed, and one that revolved entirely around Sarah. What started as casual commentary grew into something darker. Sarah's need for control expanded to every aspect of my life. She began monitoring what I wore, critiquing choices that didn't align with her preferences. If I didn't reply to her texts instantly, she would unleash a barrage of messages, accusing me of not valuing her. Her disapproval of my late hours at work escalated to accusations that I was prioritizing my career over our relationship. At first, I tried to reassure her, to balance her fears with my responsibilities. But nothing I did seemed to satisfy her. What I had mistaken for love was something entirely different. It wasn't a partnership, it was a slow erosion of my independence. Every compromise I made felt minor in the moment but added up to a larger picture where I had little room left to breathe. I convinced myself that her behavior stemmed from insecurity or a fear of losing me, and that it was my responsibility to show her she could trust me. The control was insidious, disguised as care, and by the time I recognized it, I was already in too deep. Her words, her actions, and her constant presence in my life left me doubting my own boundaries, my own instincts. I stopped seeing the red flags for what they were, blinded by the hope that I could fix things, that this was just a phase we would grow out of together. But it wasn't love. It wasn't care. It was possession, pure and simple, and it would take me much longer than I'd like to admit to realize that. The final straw came on a seemingly innocuous Friday night at my parents' house. My mom had gone all out, as she often did, with her signature lasagna on the table and a bottle of wine breathing on the counter. The atmosphere felt warm, filled with laughter and stories that transported us back to simpler times. For a brief moment, I thought I could enjoy the evening without Sarah's scrutinizing presence hovering over me. Everything was fine until my sister, Clara, brought up an old inside joke from my childhood. It wasn't anything monumental, just a silly memory involving a childhood friend, one who happened to be a girl. The comment was light-hearted, a moment of levity that had everyone laughing. Everyone except Sarah. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, her lips tightening, her eyes narrowing, her body stiffening in her seat. She stayed silent, her smile frozen in place, but I could feel the tension radiating off her like a palpable force. Throughout the rest of the evening, Sarah's demeanor grew colder. While she kept up appearances, her interactions felt clipped, her laughter forced. She had mastered the art of subtle manipulation, and by the end of the night, the balance of the room had tilted in her favor. My parents, always eager to please her, went out of their way to shower her with compliments. My father mentioned how lucky I was to have her, while my mother added how well Sarah fit into the family. Clara, who had once been my confidante, was now just another voice praising Sarah for being so composed and understanding. As the evening wore on, I began to see just how much Sarah had ingratiated herself with my family. Over time, she had carefully crafted her image with them, charming, empathetic, and always the victim in our supposed conflicts. She had dropped hints of her struggles with me in a way that painted her as the patient partner trying to support someone who was difficult, unreliable, and, as she once described it to me, emotionally distant. I had seen glimpses of this before, but sitting at that dinner table, I realized she had pulled them fully into her web. By the time we left, I felt the weight of an invisible wall between myself and my family. They had unknowingly become her allies, viewing her through the lens she had so carefully constructed. In their eyes, I was no longer their son or brother, I was the flawed partner failing to appreciate the woman who was perfect for me. Back at our apartment, the atmosphere was suffocating. The second the door clicked shut behind us, the storm I'd felt brewing all evening finally broke. Sarah's questions began slowly, her tone measured but sharp. She wanted to know why I hadn't told her about my childhood friend, why I had never mentioned the joke. Her accusations quickly gained momentum, each one more pointed and personal than the last. Her calm unraveled into fury as she painted a picture of betrayal and deceit. She accused me of keeping secrets, of still harboring feelings for someone I hadn't spoken to in years. The logic was non-existent, but it didn't matter. Sarah wasn't interested in answers, she wanted a reaction, a confession, something to justify her growing rage. When words no longer satisfied her, the outburst turned physical. She grabbed a lamp from the end table and hurled it against the wall. The crash startled me, but I stayed frozen, unsure whether to engage or retreat. Her anger was relentless. She swept past me, picked up my laptop, the one I had worked extra hours to afford, and smashed it against the floor with all her strength. The sound of the shattering plastic and glass echoed in the small apartment, punctuating the moment with finality. As I stood there in the wreckage, something inside me broke. It wasn't fear or anger but a deep, consuming exhaustion. The years of justifying her behavior, of walking on eggshells, of sacrificing parts of myself to maintain peace, it all caught up with me in that instant. Without a word, I grabbed a duffel bag and started packing. I moved mechanically, my hand selecting the bare essentials as Sarah's voice rose behind me, accusing, berating, and pleading in equal measure. She called me a coward, a liar, a failure, her words chasing me as I moved to the door. But for the first time, I didn't stop to explain or apologize. Her screams followed me into the hallway, her voice raw with rage and desperation. But I didn't look back. I walked out of the apartment, out of the chaos, out of the life I had allowed her to control. The weight of her manipulations and the isolation from my family pressed heavily on me, but as the cool night air hit my face, I felt the faintest flicker of relief. The first night, I found myself in a dingy motel room, the kind of place where the air felt stale, and the hum of the neon sign outside the window never quite disappeared. The room was dimly lit, and the bedspread, with its faded floral pattern, carried the faint smell of mildew. I sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands, the enormity of what I had done crashing over me. The relief was undeniable, a weight lifted from my chest after years of suffocating control, but it was tinged with a creeping sense of dread. I had escaped, but the question loomed, what came next? The morning brought a fragile sense of clarity. I went through the motions, blocking Sarah on every platform, deleting her number, and even changing mine to ensure no avenue was left for her to reach me. Each action felt like cutting another tether, small but necessary steps toward reclaiming my life. I moved in temporarily with Liam, my best friend, whose unspoken understanding was a balm in those early days. For the first time in years, I felt a faint sliver of peace. That peace was short-lived. Sarah wasn't finished with me. Quietly and meticulously, she reached out to my family, turning whispers of concern into a tidal wave of accusations. By the time I even realized what was happening, she had framed herself as the fragile, abandoned victim of my supposed instability. Her manipulation was devastatingly effective. My mother's sorrow cut through me like a blade, her disappointment palpable as she described the person Sarah claimed I had become. My father's reproach was even harsher, making it clear he held me entirely responsible for the chaos. The people who should have known me best had chosen to believe her lies without hesitation. The deepest wound came from Clara. Once my closest ally, she sided with Sarah, her condemnation feeling like a betrayal that shook the very core of my identity. It was as if my entire foundation had crumbled beneath me. Desperate to be heard, I spent weeks pouring my energy into explaining the truth, detailed texts, long emails recounting Sarah's manipulation, even phone calls pleading for understanding. But no matter what I said, their belief in her was unwavering. My words were dismissed as excuses, leaving me the villain in my own life. Each call and message left me hollow, the emotional toll mounting until I could barely recognize myself. The people who should have been my sanctuary had turned into strangers, their trust twisted against me. Their betrayal cut deeper than anything Sarah had ever done. With her, manipulation and deceit were expected. But with my family, the pain was visceral, a raw wound I hadn't anticipated. In the aftermath, the true depth of Sarah's influence became clear. She hadn't just isolated me during our relationship, she had turned my own family into weapons, shattering the foundation of trust I'd thought unshakable. I was left adrift in a storm of fractured loyalties, unable to comprehend how easily they had embraced her lies over my truth. Desperate to be heard, I spent weeks pouring every ounce of energy into making them see reason. My texts grew into essays, painstakingly dissecting Sarah's manipulation and recounting the years of control I had endured. I crafted each message with precision, hoping to pierce through their denial. But no matter how much I shared, my words fell into an abyss, swallowed by their unwavering belief in her fabricated story. It was all in vain. When I did manage to reach someone on the phone, those rare moments only deepened the sense of despair. Their responses were brief, dismissive, as though I were an inconvenient interruption to their day. They parroted phrases that Sarah had clearly fed them, their trust in her unwavering. It became clear that in their eyes, my attempts to explain myself were nothing more than excuses. Their unwavering belief in her made me feel like a criminal pleading for a fair trial in a court that had already handed down its verdict. The more I tried, the more futile it became. Every message, every call, every attempt to salvage the bonds I had spent a lifetime building felt like shouting into an unyielding void. The silence on the other side of my efforts was deafening, a wall of indifference that crushed any hope I had left. In time, I realized that continuing to fight for their understanding came at too great a cost. Each rejection, each refusal to listen, chipped away at me until there was almost nothing left. The emotional toll was overwhelming, leaving me hollow and exhausted. I had been prepared for the fallout with Sarah, but this was something far worse. With Sarah, I had come to expect deceit and control. But with my family, I had trusted that they would know me better, that they would see through her facade. Instead, their choice to align with her left me questioning everything: my worth, my identity, and the very foundation of my relationships. The isolation became unbearable. The people who should have been my support system had become strangers, allies to the person who had caused me so much pain. The warmth and familiarity I once associated with family gatherings now felt like distant memories, replaced by a cold void where love and trust had once been. Eventually, I stopped trying. I let go, not out of anger, but out of a desperate need to protect what little remained of myself. Continuing to fight for their understanding was a battle I could no longer endure. I had to accept that their version of reality was one I could not change, no matter how much I wished otherwise. The isolation settled in, a constant companion in the quiet moments of my days. Yet, amidst the pain, there was a flicker of clarity. I began to understand that sometimes the people who should know you best are the ones who can hurt you the most. And in that understanding, I started to find the strength to rebuild, alone, but free from the weight of their judgment. I immersed myself in work, finding solace in the structure and predictability of my daily responsibilities. It became a refuge, a place where my worth was measured in tangible outcomes rather than the emotional minefield of relationships. With the modest paycheck I earned, I rented a tiny studio apartment. The space was small, barely more than a bed, a table, and a kitchenette, but it was mine. It was the first place I had lived in years where the silence wasn't suffocating, where I didn't have to justify my choices or anticipate someone else's moods. Therapy became another lifeline. Dr. Evans, my therapist, had a way of making me feel seen in a way I hadn't experienced in years. Her office, with its overstuffed chairs and shelves of books, was a space where I could unravel the tangled mess of my past without fear of judgment. She didn't just help me process what had happened with Sarah, she delved deeper, guiding me to confront the vulnerabilities that had made me susceptible to her control in the first place. Together, we unearthed patterns I hadn't realized were there: the need for constant validation, the fear of rejection, and a tendency to prioritize others' needs over my own. Gradually, piece by piece, I began to rebuild. The small pleasures I had abandoned during my relationship with Sarah started to reappear in my life. I picked up a paintbrush again, letting the colors flow freely on canvas without fear of criticism. Running became a ritual, the rhythmic pounding of my feet on pavement a form of meditation. Even the act of watching a movie felt like a quiet rebellion, no longer overshadowed by someone else's derision over my choices. Reconnecting with old friends was both liberating and bittersweet. Some relationships had been strained to the breaking point by Sarah's influence, her subtle ways of driving wedges between me and the people who mattered. But others welcomed me back with open arms, their understanding and warmth a stark contrast to the isolation I had endured. These friends became the foundation of a new support system, a chosen family of people who genuinely cared for me without expectation or manipulation. Yet, no matter how much progress I made, the void left by my biological family remained. Holidays were the hardest, those times of year that were supposed to be about togetherness and belonging. Social media became a cruel window into a world I was no longer part of. Pictures of my family with Sarah appeared, their smiles and laughter framing her as though she were an integral part of their lives, as if she belonged there more than I ever had. It was a silent confirmation of everything I had feared: my family had not just believed her, they had embraced her. Unfollowing them was a decision I wrestled with for weeks, but eventually, it became necessary. Seeing those images, those moments where I had been replaced, felt like reopening a wound that refused to heal. But even after cutting off that digital connection, the pain lingered. The void wasn't just about their absence, it was about the realization that they had chosen someone else's narrative over mine, that they had willingly turned their backs on me in my time of need. 2 years later, I'm in a much better place. I've built a life I'm proud of, surrounded by people who truly know and support me. But the scars remain. Sometimes, I still dream about that night at the motel, about Sarah's screams and the coldness in my mother's voice. I don't know if my family will ever see the truth. Maybe one day Sarah will move on to her next victim, and they'll realize what she really is. Or maybe they won't. Either way, I've stopped living for their approval. This is my life now, and for the first time in years, it feels like mine. Have any of you been through something similar? How did you cope with the betrayal of those closest to you, or manage to move forward after losing trust in the people you thought would always stand by you? I'd love to hear your thoughts or experiences. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. Update 1. A few of you have asked if I've had any updates about Sarah or my family, and I do have something to share. It's not what I expected, but it gave me clarity in ways I didn't anticipate. A couple of weeks ago, I ran into Sarah at a coffee shop I frequent. She was with someone, a man who looked drained, his posture heavy, his face bearing a familiar weariness. When she saw me, she approached with a bright, practiced smile, introducing him as her partner. The interaction felt surreal, like stepping back into a chapter of my life I'd thought was long closed. She was overly friendly, acting as though the past had been erased. But as I watched her, I noticed the same behaviors that had once trapped me, the subtle dominance in her tone, the way her presence seemed to consume his space. It wasn't the words she spoke to him but the hesitation in his responses, the flinch in his body language, that reminded me of my own experiences. When I walked away, I realized just how far I'd come. The unease I felt wasn't fear or guilt, it was recognition of something I'd escaped. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to fix her, to justify myself, or to explain. Instead, I felt gratitude for the freedom I'd fought to reclaim. That man might not see it yet, but I hope he finds his way out someday. Update 2. Many of you have asked if I've had any contact with my family, and I do have a meaningful update. For the first time in years, I feel like there's a chance to rebuild something I thought was lost forever. Clara, my sister, reached out to me recently. It started with a simple message, a hesitant check-in that I almost ignored. But something told me to give it a chance. Over the weeks that followed, we exchanged messages, gradually moving from surface-level updates to deeper conversations. Clara admitted that she had begun questioning Sarah's version of events not long after I left. She noticed inconsistencies in Sarah's behavior and stories, but by the time she pieced it together, she felt it was too late to reach out to me. Hearing her say this was bittersweet. It validated what I had endured, but it also highlighted how much damage had already been done. When we finally met in person, the tension was palpable. Our first conversation was stilted, filled with small talk and long pauses, but there was an unspoken understanding that both of us were trying. Clara expressed regret for not standing by me when I needed her most, and while I told her I understood, it wasn't easy to ignore the hurt that lingered. Still, this new connection feels like progress. Each interaction reminds me that healing isn't just about moving forward, it's also about finding ways to mend what's broken. Having Clara back in my life, even in this tentative way, is a reminder that not everything is lost forever. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm not completely alone when it comes to my family. That feeling is worth holding on to. Update 3. A lot of you have asked if I've heard anything about Sarah recently, and yes, I have. The news left me conflicted but also brought a strange sense of closure. Through a mutual acquaintance, I learned that Sarah has been institutionalized. Her new partner endured escalating outbursts that culminated in a physical attack during an argument. Intervention became unavoidable, and she was placed in a psychiatric facility. Hearing this stirred a mix of emotions. Part of me felt vindicated, her destructive tendencies were finally undeniable. But another part felt sadness, not for her specifically, but for the cycle of pain she perpetuated, both for herself and the people around her. Reflecting on this, I realized how far I've come. The resentment I once carried toward her is gone, replaced by clarity. Her actions left deep scars, but her unraveling feels less like justice and more like a cautionary tale. I don't pity her, but I also find no satisfaction in her downfall. As for my family, I can't say whether this news has changed their perception of her, or of me. Perhaps they'll finally see the truth, or perhaps they'll cling to their version of events to avoid facing their mistakes. Either way, it's no longer my burden. What matters most is that Sarah's chapter in my story is closed. I've made peace with the past and who I've become because of it. My focus is on the life I've rebuilt and the future I'm working toward. For the first time in years, I feel genuinely free.
Hey, did you love this story? Subscribe and turn on notifications for more.